Okay, here we go. This will be, or this is, session 29. We're still in chapter 4, the illusions of the ego. That's the name of the chapter. It's when, in the flow of the text, Jesus is really introducing the ego in a big way, devoting the whole chapter to it. All right, and some of its machinations and some of the things that it does. And the rest of the book will be pointing out the ego, and because that's what the book is all about, is recognizing the ego and then saying, no, I don't want that. I prefer the right mind, the higher mind. All right, and we're in section 5 on page 65, the ego-body illusion. It's section 5, Roman numeral V. I have to tell one of my favorite Roman numeral jokes, where the Roman walks up to the bartender and holds up 2 fingers and says, 5 beers, please. I always laugh at that. Okay, that's enough. Be serious. That's what Ken would always say to me. Dr. Wapnick would always say to me, he goes, Kevin, you're still taking things too seriously. And this is my attempt to, one day when I meet him again, say, no, I got over that. Okay, section 5, the ego-body illusion. All things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. The ego exerts maximal vigilance about what it permits into awareness, and this is not the way a balanced mind holds together. The ego is thrown further off balance because it keeps its primary motivation from your awareness and raises control rather than sanity to predominance. The ego has every reason to do this, according to the thought system which gave rise to it and which it serves. Sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego and must be obliterated by the ego in the interest of its self-preservation. Okay. At the end of the last section, which we did in session 28, part 2, the last sentence, Jesus says, my calling you is as natural as your answer and as inevitable. Okay. So he expands on that thought that it's inevitable that sooner or later you will invite your higher mind into the situation, whatever the situation is, and you will ask for help in seeing things correctly. You will say, I don't want the conflict anymore. I don't want the fear. I don't want the anger. All right? Help me, whoever it is in my mind. Help me. We're petitioning a higher mind, and whatever symbol of love is in your higher mind, that's helpful, you know. We use Jesus and Holy Spirit in the Course of Miracles, but, you know, go around the world and people will use other symbols, just so many other symbols, all right? I mean, one of my favorite books was Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. He always had his guru in his thoughts. And his guru was that symbol of love, all right? And that is expansive and eternal, all right? And I always remember Dr. Wapnick would say, you could, all right, so if Jesus works for you, that's good. You know, there's Buddha, right? There's Krishna, there's Kamyanko, and somebody raised their hand and said, oh, wait, who's Kamyanko? And he said, oh, that was the man that sold bagels in Williamsburg when I was a kid. And everybody chuckled. But the point is that if Kamyanko was a man who had reached the awareness of how things work, so to speak, and who he was and where he fit in with eternity and God and walking the earth, then he would be spreading that word. And you would go in and order your bagels, and you would be in his mind space, so to speak. All right? And he would be very helpful. All right? He would be very helpful. Okay? It doesn't matter what, you don't have to be a preacher, you don't have to be a professional teacher or anything. You know, you can sell the bagels, you could sell the hot dogs, you could be a plumber, right? You could be a nurse, all right? A massage therapist, all right? You're holding that space in the higher mind. Okay. So all things work together for good. There are no exceptions, except in the ego's judgment, all right? And here's what he tells us. Here's one of the things, one of the main things the ego does. It exerts maximal vigilance. The ego is always awake, right? Looking, right? About what it permits into my awareness, into your awareness. Okay? And this is not the way a balanced mind holds together. All right? So its primary motivation is self-preservation, the thought of separation, individuality. Just wants to preserve that. All right? And so it keeps that awareness from us, that the ego is just interested in self-preservation. Okay? And so, as he says here, it raises control rather than sanity to predominance. So the ego would rather control than help you contact sanity, you know. And that's why if you think, oh, maybe I should meditate, maybe I should do yoga, maybe I should do, maybe I should go to church, if people that derive great benefits from, spiritual gatherings, whatever denomination it is, there are people who can reach wonderful spiritual heights. All right? The ego will, make up all kinds of things to distract you. Usually you use your body. Oh, well, yeah, I'm going to meditate, but before I do that, I really need to get a glass of water. Right? Oh, I'm going to read the course. Oh, I do much better when I have a cup of coffee. I feel more relaxed. Or I don't know exactly what these words mean, so how can I be telling people about it? What am I doing that for? All kinds of things. My leg hurts. The dog ate my text. Whatever. The ego will go out of its way to keep any thought of awareness of a higher self, keep that from you. All right? And the ego has every reason to do this, according to the thought system which gave rise to it, and which it serves. That thought system of sin, guilt, and fear, separation. All right? And Jesus says, look, sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego. It's like, what a crazy situation, what a crazy world this is. There must be a better way to exist. Philosophers and poets and artists of all kinds have, touched on that. the ego rushes back in to defend again, because it would be obliterated by a sane mind. The thought of separation from oneness, the thought of separation from your source would be completely insane. And we would immediately want to be back with God, right, with our source, right? And the ego would be summarily dismissed, as they say. All right? So the ego doesn't want to permit any of those thoughts, doesn't want you to go near it. All right? And he'll elaborate on that thought in this next paragraph, paragraph 2. A major source of the ego's off-balanced state is its lack of discrimination between the body and the thoughts of God. The thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. The ego therefore either distorts them or refuses to accept them. It cannot, however, make them cease to be. Okay. It therefore tries to conceal not only unacceptable body impulses, but also the thoughts of God, because both are threatening to it. Being concerned primarily with its own preservation in the face of threat, the ego perceives them as the same. By perceiving them as the same, the ego attempts to save itself from being swept away, as it would surely be in the presence of knowledge. So he's just basically elaborating on what we were just talking about. So you have this thought, I want to connect with spiritual people. I want to, even perhaps if you need to go to therapy or you need to go to see, a certain type of group, which would stop the noisy distractions. It's countless the way the ego has so many distractions, and there are so many, because God, it can't stop, all right? It can't stop the thoughts of God, all right? It's like the Course will tell you over and over again. God is, to use words, God is speaking to us all through the day, all through the night as you sleep. The thought is unending. All right? It's always expanding into our mind. All right? The thoughts of oneness, bliss, invulnerability, the love, the generosity, the kindness, all of these wrapped into a thought, right? Which is what is being extended from the source, all right? And so the ego needs to constantly create static so that we can't hear that message. We're not hearing that message until we make the decision to, fine-tune it, like you used to have to do with your radios and transistor radios, trying to find that one little place where the signal comes through loud and clear. Right? I don't know what the modern technological equivalent is, but there's a lot of static out there. Right? There's a lot of interference. Right? I guess the thoughts would be pixelated today. All right, all broken up into little pixels. It's hard to see that. All right, but that's just what the ego does. It's interested in self-preservation. It's the thought of separation and individuality. Right? And it doesn't want to be obliterated. So it equates, even if my body wants to go to a spiritual group, or my body wants to sit down and do something that's deemed spiritual, even if I just want to be quiet, which is where as Eckhart Tolle would say, stillness speaks. All right, and Thich Nhat Hanh is mindfulness. There's mindfulness in the quieting of the mind and bringing yourself into the present moment. All right, the ego causes a ruckus. You know, if you listen to Pema Chodron talk about her initial experiences with meditation, sitting on the cushion, as she would say. All right, I mean, it's for me, forget about it, but it's the most uncomfortable thing. As a beginner, you know, it's just uncomfortable. You're putting your legs and your feet in this lotus position, and you're sitting, your spine straight, and I know in my experience, my body just says, ain't nobody got time for that. So that would be a major distraction. You know, like I say, the ego has many, many, many distractions, many. Oh, I have to make that phone call, right? Right? Whatever, a million, right? So thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego. Right? It therefore tries to conceal not only unacceptable body impulses, but also the thoughts of God, because both are threatening. And it's concerned only with self-preservation. Okay? So I was having trouble, trying to really grasp that concept of unacceptable body impulses. But I think that's, close enough, right? Saying if we had an idea to go do something that was deemed, mindful, spiritual, or, even healthy, for God's sake, the ego would find so many ways to block that out, because it's concerned with self-preservation. And if your mind when it clears up and it touches on sanity, which, as we mentioned, is really the root word of that is health, it would look at the ego and say, "What, are you kidding me? How can I believe that?" And dismiss it, let it go, relinquish it, as we say. So let's look on page 66 at paragraph 3, right, after he is telling us that the ego would be swept away in the presence of knowledge. Any thought system that confuses God and the body must be insane. Yet this confusion is essential to the ego, which judges only in terms of threat or non-threat to itself. In one sense, the ego's fear of God is at least logical, since the idea of him does dispel the ego. But fear of the body, with which the ego identifies so closely, makes no sense at all. All right, and we'll go on to paragraph 4. The body is the ego's home by its own election. It is the only identification with which the ego feels safe, since the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly. Yet the ego hates the body because it cannot accept it as good enough to be its home. Here is where the mind becomes actually dazed. Being told by the ego that it is really part of the body and that the body is its protector, the mind is also told that the body cannot protect it. Therefore, the mind asks, "Where can I go for protection?" To which the ego replies, "Turn to me." The mind, and not without cause, reminds the ego that it has itself insisted that it is identified with the body, so there is no point in turning to it for protection. The ego has no real answer to this because there is none, but it does have a typical solution. It obliterates the question from the mind's awareness. Once out of awareness, the question can and does produce uneasiness, but it cannot be answered because it cannot be asked. Okay? So the ego doesn't even want you to question its thought system, its premises. It doesn't want you to even question that. So Jesus is telling us, so that what the ego does, it obliterates the question from your mind. You don't even think about asking it. How could this be? If I'm this individual, how does this body get old and decay? I always like the image that Eckhart Tolle presents when he's talking about time and its effects. He goes, put an apple on your windowsill and just let it sit there and just watch the effects of time. Okay? Oh my goodness, I am the apple, believe me. But that's the ego has no answer for that except, to bolster its own statement that, well, you can't be one with God. But look what's happening to you. You're getting dried and wrinkled. Okay then, we'll leave it at that. We'll stop at dry and wrinkled. Okay, but that's the ego's thing. It says, look, how could you be of God? Right? How could God have made you? Look, you're just wasting away here. You're vulnerable to everything. Right? Even if you were young, you're still vulnerable. Right? So the ego is nuts. And it doesn't want you to ask the question, well, how could this be? Right? Because the ego always has some kind of an answer. Well, do this, you'll feel better. Do that, you'll feel better. Do this, that'll make you happy. Do that, it'll make you secure. It's got all kinds of answers, okay? Okay. So he says this, this is paragraph 5. This is the question that must be asked. Where can I go for protection? Seek and ye shall find does not mean that you should seek blindly and desperately for something you would not recognize. Meaningful seeking is consciously undertaken, consciously organized, and consciously directed. The goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. Learning and wanting to learn are inseparable. You learn best when you believe what you are trying to learn is of value to you. However, not everything you may want to learn has lasting value. Indeed, many of the things you want to learn may be chosen because their value will not last. Right? So, he says the goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. Right? Once again, we go back to Jesus' statement to Helen that you're much too tolerant of mind wandering. Right? Because what gave birth, so to speak, to the Course was a discussion between Bill Thetford, William Thetford, and Helen Schuckman on their way to a meeting in the psychology department at Columbia University, where there was bickering and all kinds of, backstabbing and what. And they were personally bickerers. They would always be bickering. And until Bill was, that I can't go on like this. There must be a better way. There has to be a better way. Right? And Helen agreed with him. There was the joining. Helen agreed and said, yes, I will help you find it. Okay? So that's the goal. So the goal was formulated clearly. But, you know, even Helen being a human being and Bill Thetford being a human being, you know, fully ensconced in the ego thought system, had to be reminded that you're much too tolerant of mind wandering. All right? So the goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. You know, like that saying, keep your eyes on the prize. Right? Keep your eyes on the prize. Right? And that's it. Keep yourself, say, oh no, that's not helping me realize my connection to God. That's not helping me realizing the oneness that is all around me. Right? Because that's the goal. The goal is to reach those awarenesses. Right? And then ultimately rejoin or realize that we are in the mind of God. It's not like a rejoining, it's a realization that's where we are. Right? And he says you learn best when you believe what you are trying to learn is of value to you. Seriously. Right? I mean, if you were going to move to another country that spoke a different language and it was very beneficial for you to be there, you wanted to be there, you would learn, you'd have a desire to learn the language. You know? Or you want to be a doctor, you want to help people. You want to be a nurse, you want to help people. Any of the helping professions, anything really. You know, if it's of value to you, you'll, you know, be very keen to learn. You want to be a carpenter. To make those cuts. I want to learn about beams and joists and all those things that are quite confusing to me. All right? But it's wondrous. It would be of value to you. Right? Anything you learn best when you believe it's valuable to you. So if you know, you're remembering your connection to oneness, your connection to God as a value to you, you know, this is one way, all right, of learning about that. So you'll want to learn. Okay. Paragraph 6. The ego thinks it is an advantage not to commit itself to anything that is eternal, because the eternal must come from God. Eternalness is the one function that the ego has tried to develop, but has systematically failed to achieve. The ego compromises with the issue of the eternal, just as it does with all issues touching on the real question in any way. Becoming involved with tangential issues, it hopes to hide the real question and keep it out of mind. The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is for precisely that purpose. Preoccupations with problems set up to be incapable of solution are favorite ego devices for impeding learning progress. In all these diversionary tactics, however, the one question that is never asked by those who pursue them is, what for? This is the question that you must learn to ask in connection with anything, with everything. What is the purpose? Whatever it is, it will direct your efforts automatically. When you make a decision of purpose, then, you have made a decision about your future effort, a decision that will remain in effect unless you change your mind. Right? So, the ego tries to be eternal. Right? This building will last forever. This monument, will last forever. So, you could ask the dinosaurs about forever. Things in form have a certain amount of time, and then they're not there anymore. There is no eternity in form, right? I mean, even the planets dissolve after a certain amount of time, which is also illusory, right? And he says that the ego tries to hide the question, the real question about eternity, right? And what's eternal, what's not, and with tangential issues, all those things that we were talking about. I don't have time. I don't have time to study the course. I got to prepare my taxes. And believe me, and this is not to make you depressed or anything. You ease your way into these ideas, but you study the course long enough, and you realize that Jesus considers everything in this world a tangential issue and a non-essential. All right? The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is precisely for that purpose, to keep the real question out of our mind, like, who am I? Right? So preoccupations with problems set up to be incapable of solution are favorite ego devices for impeding learning progress. And as we get closer and closer to the truth, you'll see that these problems, perceived problems, they get some of them get bigger and more frightening, and but basically we'll come to learn that they are tangential issues, okay, non-essentials. I'm not dismissing or trying to minimalize anything that anyone is going through, right? Because anything that anyone is going through or experiencing, it can be a classroom, right? It is your classroom, right? It is the script you came in to read, right? So, you deal with it, ask, how do I perceive this correctly, right? And Jesus says the main question is, what is it for? What is it for? Right? Is it to reinforce the idea of separation? Or is it to help me to realize oneness of all things? And that's what everything is for, right? So, whatever it is, whatever the purpose is of those two purposes, right, it will direct your efforts automatically. What is it for? I want it to be to help me with my awareness. I want it to help me with my awareness of oneness, my awareness of God. So he says your efforts will be directed automatically. Right? When you make a decision of purpose, then you have made a decision about your future effort. A decision that will remain in effect unless you change your mind. Right? So if I make the decision I swear, I had an experience one time where I was in a customer service experience, a situation, and the customer was being very irate and very rude to a person who was working for me. I was in like a management position. And I noticed myself becoming angry, and I wanted to protect this young person. And I swear, I had this thought that, because I had to walk around a barrier to get there. And I swear, I remember saying, okay, Jesus, I'll handle this one. I swear, it was that silly. But that's what happened. And I went around and I, verbally eviscerated this person. And there it was. That was my decision, right, to enter the fray, enter the sandbox, enter the battle, that you or me existence, enter the ego and take care of business. And, that directed my my effort, my action. All right. And that decision remained in effect, right, to go into the ego. And I automatically felt the loss of peace of mind. And, because we keep track of things with time, such as, minutes, hours, days, it took me several days to get back even close to higher-minded thinking. I just felt horrible. I automatically was filled with guilt, like I had done something wrong, and now I'm guilty and I deserve punishment. Right? And so those decisions, whether we're that much aware of them or not, they affect us. And they remain in effect until we say, no, I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to think that way. I don't want to act that way. Help me. Appealing to the higher mind, whatever symbol, as we say, whatever symbol is good for you. Right? Here we use Jesus, and I consider Jesus like an old friend, an old buddy, right? And a brother. And I appealed to him and said, okay, help me to see correctly. And sometimes I have to ask, help me to see myself correctly, because I don't like what I see. The ego thought system loves that when you truly hate yourself, because it's fueling its own existence. All right? So all those decisions for the ego or for the higher mind, right mind, ego or Jesus, Holy Spirit, right? The thought of separation or the memory of who you really are, those are the decisions, the two decisions. And they remain in effect until you change your mind. All right? Obviously, before I approached that irate customer, I changed my mind. I was no longer asking Jesus to walk me through this. I told him, wait here, I'll be right back. It took me days to get back. Okay. So that's the ego-body illusion. All right? Section 5. The end of session 29. I wish you all great days, happy days. All right? And we'll see yous again soon. All right then. Bye now.